happy to be here. Today I'll be sharing with you about my year that I spent in Slovakia. So this is probably my absolute favorite topic to talk about. And because of that, just tell me a time and place where someone wants to listen to me talk about it, and I'll be there. This is, as I mentioned, about my year in the ELCA's program, Young Adults in Global Mission. So right after I graduated from A&M in 2009, I graduated in May, and then in August of that same year, I went off. And so we're going to hope that our fancy new clicker is going to reach. It might not, Olivia. You think so? You think it's going to give me problems? If not, I'm just going to have you. Okay, that worked. Was that me or you? That was me. Okay, good. So I wanted to give you a little bit of background about Young Adults in Global Mission, and you may hear me call it YAGM for short, Y-A-G-M, the acronym, because otherwise it's a mouthful. So this is from the ELCA. So YAGM, what is it? It's a year of service through the Young Adults in Global Mission program, where young adults are invited to become the hands and feet of Jesus in the world, providing critical support to ministries and projects in communities of need. It also invites volunteers into a journey of self-reflection, providing space to consider their sense of identity, God's work in the world, and their place within it all. And it keeps going. Maybe, Olivia, you may have to advance that slide. Thank you. Young adults serve in the spirit of accompaniment, walking alongside global companions in a manner that practices mutuality, interdependence, and solidarity. Areas of service include, but are not limited to, health and development, congregational ministry, human rights, education, homelessness, addiction recovery, women's issues, and children and youth. All site placements provide opportunities for young adults to confront issues of wealth and poverty, racial privilege, economic disparity, and globalization, all through the lens of faith. So that's the big, broad goal and scope of Young Adults in Global Mission. And I'm going to tell you a little bit about how I got there. Okay, so it's easy to say that this is about how I got there, but in truth, it's more about how God got me there. So when I was a junior in college at A&M, we had a recruiter come who had just returned from their experience with Young Adults in Global Mission. So he's telling us about his story and his experience and what he did. And so here I am, a junior in college, thinking, oh, that sounds pretty good. Maybe that might be kind of an adventure. And then the next year rolled around. I was coming up on graduation. We had another recruiter come and talk to our campus ministry group. And she shared her experience of where she had lived and served and everything. And part of the way God got me there is because I also didn't have a job after graduation. So to me, this was excellent timing. I thought, boy, I sure would love to go have an adventure, and serving in the church that I love, that sounds good. And I don't have a job anyway, so maybe this is the time. Maybe this is when everything lines up and I have the opportunity that I could do this. So I remember I was filling out the application online, tell us about yourself, tell us about what you've been doing so far in your life, tell us why you want to go, all that kind of stuff. And as I got to the bottom of the application, I remember I hovered, my mouse hovered over the word submit, click. You have to click submit, and then it sends it off, right? So I remember I put my mouse there, and then I just paused. I paused because somehow in my brain and in my heart, I knew that if I submitted my application, I was going. So I paused in that moment, partly for myself, because I was realizing the gravity of what was happening. But in that pause, I clearly remember God speaking to me. It is maybe one of 2 or 3 times in my life where I heard words, discernible words from God. And those words were, Lisa, you don't have to go. It's not going to be easy, but I promise you it'll be worth it. And then I clicked submit. And so thus really began my journey with young adults and global mission. So they have an application process, they have a discernment process. They bring all of the applicants together for a discernment event in Wisconsin. You go through, you worship together, you have some learning together, and then you have your interviews. And at the end of that event, they will tell you if you've been selected, and if so, which country site you will be sent to. The year that I participated, there were about 9 country sites. So in addition to Slovakia, there was the UK, West Bank, Jerusalem, South Africa, Malaysia, Argentina, Mexico, 1 or 2 others in there. And I really thought I wanted to go to the United Kingdom because I knew how to speak English. And I thought, that sure sounds good. If I'm going to be away from home for a year, send me to a place where I know the language. And I was a bit of an Anglophile, I was an English major. We had read all of the great English authors and everything. So I went, that was my first interview. It was down to couple of countries, the UK and Slovakia. So I went to my UK interview. And y'all, I used to think I could speak well, but in that interview, I could barely form 2 coherent sentences. So the interviewers were asking me these questions, and I couldn't explain it, but I could barely speak on any topic, much less why I wanted to go or felt called to go to the UK. So I left that interview. I remember shutting the door, walking out into the hallway, and this is what I said. Lisa, what the hell was that? And I couldn't shake it. I thought, this is it. I'm done. I'm going home. I guess I'm not going. Well, then later that day, I went to my interview for Slovakia. I knew very little about Slovakia. I knew more about Czechoslovakia than I knew about Slovakia. So I went into that interview, and y'all, I was eloquent. Every question they answered or asked, I had an answer for. I was remembering facts about World War II that I hadn't thought of since junior high. But I was recalling things, I was answering, and I somehow just knew, oh, this is it. This is different. I think I'm on a different path than I originally thought. And sure enough, I was selected to go to Slovakia, much to my surprise, but not to God's surprise. So let's see if we can. There we go. So you might be trying to rack your brain and remember exactly where Slovakia is. So, this is my pointer, I think. Yes, it is. Okay, so Slovakia is in what's considered Central Europe. For a lot of people, it feels like Eastern Europe, especially if you've spent more time, on the western side in France or Austria. But we consider Slovakia to be Central Europe. Just north is the border with Poland. It does border Czechia, which used to be called Czech Republic. It also borders Austria, Hungary, and Ukraine. So that kind of gives you some bearing there. Let's see if we got this. Olivia, could you advance that slide? Thank you. So here's some basics about Slovakia. It's got about 5 million people, so not a huge population. Czechia, Czech Republic, definitely has more people there. The 2 countries separated from each other in 1992, and it was actually a peaceful separation, which is rare. Typically, when countries split apart, it is full of war and conflict, but this was a peaceful separation. Slovakia used to be part of the USSR, and you can tell. When you go to Slovakia, you look around at the buildings, at the architecture, and even if you've never been to Russia, you know, like, that's what it looks like. So there's definitely a piece of the USSR that's left over there. And then formerly part of the Austro-Hungarian Empire. So historically, Slovakia has always been kind of it's really gone back and forth between who was in charge, who was the reigning empire, who was the dominant political influence there. But now it is its own independent state. They have both. They have the prime minister and presidential system. So yes, they are on paper a democracy, but it's a very delicate democracy. They had for a couple generations been a part of the USSR, and so that has really left its impact and an imprint on the people of Slovakia. So I lived with a host family, which you'll see them in just a second, but I remember my host dad, we were watching the evening news one night, and it was a press conference of some sort for some local government officials or state officials. And I remember him looking at the TV screen and telling me, he's a communist, he's a communist, he's a communist. And he wasn't kidding. I mean, he wasn't saying that facetiously. He was telling me those people are holdovers from the previous regime. And they may be calling themselves, they may be proclaiming democracy now, but we know who they really are. So that's a little bit of Slovakia at large. Let's see if we can get to, there we go, where in particular I was. So we've got the border of Slovakia here, and I was on the eastern side, the far eastern side, in a town called Prešov, okay? So I was right there. The town had about 100,000 people in it, so really good-sized town. And if you'll notice, I was almost equidistant from the border to Poland, as the border to Hungary, as the border to Ukraine. So we were really at a crossroads in the town that I lived in. And you could see, I mean, there was a lot of bleeding over of cultural influences where we were. Okay, let's see. There we go. So this is where I lived. This is the house that I lived in right here. This window, that was my window. My host mom, this is her, this is who she is. Her name was Lubitsa. We all called her Lubka. And this was her husband, Milan. And they just had such a wonderful home, which was a bit unusual for the rest of Slovakia. But what enabled them to have this whole site here, this is actually the house that Lubka grew up in. But after the fall of communism, so during communism, all of the industry was state-owned. All of the major industries were state-owned. And so at the end of communism, when that fell, Milan, my host dad, he and some friends of his got together and they purchased an iron factory. And they continue, well, he for sure is still an owning partner in that factory, but that became their business. And so they, I'm trying to think of the proper words for it. There's metallurgy, the smelting of metal and things like that for various parts that they would ship to other countries. But that was their business. And so I will tell y'all, when I thought, okay, here I am going to be a missionary, they tell you pack light, take a suitcase and a backpack, don't take valuables, you're going to be living light, okay? Y'all, they had a swimming pool in the basement, okay? They had a swimming pool in the basement. They had a sauna in the basement. They had a gym. So I got there and I thought, I don't think my colleagues are living in places as nice as this. Sure enough, I was right. I had some colleagues also stationed in Slovakia that were staying in kind of a dorm. One of them was staying in a dorm. I had a colleague that was in Hungary who had to learn how to chop her own firewood to stay warm in the winter. So, but I mean, I was very grateful that I had a good place to stay. And Milan and Lubka were so gracious. They were so hospitable that our house became the hub. It became the escape for all of my colleagues in the area. So for a holiday or for my birthday, my American friends would take the train, they would meet me, and we would get to be together and relax and just kind of decompress together. So it really was a blessing to have that available to us. So this is clearly summertime. It's nice and green. I don't know if I brought a winter picture with me, but in the winter, this was all covered in snow. So it definitely snowed in the winter. We had snow on the ground from probably the 1st of December through maybe the end of March, something like that, maybe early March. But yeah, snow on the ground for several months out of the year. So Milan and Luca, they had 3 children, 3 adult children that were all off in college. All 3 of their children were multilingual and spoke English. Milan and Luca were also multilingual. Between the 2 of them, they knew 5 languages, and none of them were English. So they spoke Slovak, Czech, Hungarian, German, and Russian. No English, though. So I had to learn Slovak, which I loved, actually. That was one of my favorite things. As hard as it was, learning Slovak was really one of the most helpful and most precious pieces of my time there. Because speaking a common language means you get to have more relationships with people. You get to build relationships with people. The pinnacle of my success, well, not the pinnacle, but one shining moment of learning Slovak. I was at a bus stop one evening, and this Slovak teenager came up to me and didn't know I was American. And in Slovak, they asked me for the time. And I just told them the time in Slovak, and they left, and I thought, I did it! I could answer the question. It didn't matter that I was an American. I understood them. They understood me. This is the best. So I had a tutor, a Slovak tutor, who was actually an English teacher in Slovakia. That was her profession, and so she taught me Slovak. I met with her weekly and did my language training. So this is what Slovak sounds like. Let's see. Dobrý deň, volám sa Lisa, pracujem ako fariárka. What else would I say? Something like that. So it's just, hello, my name is Lisa, I'm a pastor. So it sounds a little, it definitely sounds Slavic. If you know Czech, you can probably understand some of it. But yeah, lots of consonants in Slovak. So this is the church that I served in. I actually have a painting of this church on the table in the foyer. It was built around the 1680s, so quite old compared to what I was used to. And this was smack dab in the middle of town, right in the middle of Main Street, or the main square, and then Main Street kind of diverged around it. So this is the outside of the building. And this is the inside of the building. So in very typical European church fashion, behind the altar, there was a large painting. You'll see that in a lot of Lutheran churches. Really hard wooden pews. No cushions for them, no cushions. So this is looking to the front of the sanctuary from up above, and this is looking back at the organ. So you can kind of see the perspective looking forward and looking backwards. Also, no heat. No heat in the sanctuary. So my host dad, Milan, didn't go to church in the winter because he was bald. And he said his head got too cold and he wasn't going to do it. So I don't know if that's really why he didn't want to go, but that was his excuse. So here you can see this is their baptistry, their baptismal font right there. That doesn't move. And then they do have one of the raised pulpits. So, the pastor there's some stairs back down here, and so he would go up here and preach from there most of the time. So that's the inside of the church. So what was I even doing there? So you heard at the beginning kind of an explanation of, thank you, Mom, of what YAGM in general does. And so this is what I was doing specifically. My job was threefold. So I volunteered, or I was sent to volunteer with a group called Hniezdo, which means nest. And it was a ministry of the Lutheran Church in town, and it still supports young Roma women as they learn how to live independently, especially those who have come from an orphanage. So one of the largest ethnic minorities in Europe is called the Roma. If you happen to see them on the street, you might think that they are Hispanic. One of our Americans that came over for a short trip, that's what she thought. She did not realize it. But they have darker skin, darker hair. They tend to have brown eyes. And so the Roma, though, are a very, very marginalized ethnic group in Europe. They're in terms of their history, for a long time they had an oral history, so not much was written down. But through genealogical tracking, the best they can determine is that about 1,000 years ago, there was a group that moved west out of India. And that ethnic group that moved west fanned out across Europe. So you will find Roma people all over Europe. I mean, from Spain, Germany, in the UK, they really are spread out across Europe. But as I mentioned, very marginalized. They've always been a minority wherever they've been. And they've been very... they've just suffered a lot of discrimination over the years. So when I was in Slovakia, there was a news report out of kind of one of the border towns near Hungary that one of the Roma homes was vandalized with Molotov cocktails. So, a bottle of gasoline, you put a rag in it, you light the rag, you throw it. And so, it was not just verbal discrimination on the street that people experienced, but real violence and physical harm as well. Another part of my job was to assist the youth group at the Lutheran Church. So they have youth groups just like we do. They sing camp songs just like we do. And so I would help with the youth group, and then I also had a small group of high school girls, and so we would have Bible study together. And then I also taught English. I had 3 different groups. Well, one private student, one group of moms who were anywhere from 40 to 60 years old. Their children were marrying Englishmen. and so the moms wanted to make sure they would be able to speak to their grandchildren. And so they wanted to learn English. So I had that group, and then I had a group of young parents that had learned English in school, but were going to live in Slovakia. They just wanted to keep up with their language skills, just to maintain their language skills. So those are my 3 jobs. And these are some of the young women that I worked with. So Tanya, Anezhka, can't remember her name, but that's okay. There was a part of our group had a bit of a transient element to it because in Slovakia, when you aged out of the orphanage system at age 18, if you were Roma, you had even fewer options than the majority population of Slovakia. So imagine growing up in an orphanage system and then at 18, having to live on your own. It's very difficult. And so Hniezdo, the group that kind of the nonprofit ministry of the church, they helped fund an apartment, kind of a halfway house for these young women so that they could learn how to cook, how to clean, how to make doctor's appointments, how to just navigate life on their own. And in the bottom corner here, these are a couple of nuns from Prešov, the town that I lived in. The Roma girls just had a really strong bond with them, and the Roman Catholic Church also had ministries for the Roma people. So we would cross paths at various points. And there was a small, if you're a monk, it's a monastery. If you're a nun, it's a what? Convent. Thank you. Yes, so there was a convent in town, yes, so that's where those nuns lived and had their ministries from. So as I mentioned, the Roma people were very disadvantaged, lots of discrimination, and their living conditions were often unacceptable, not just subpar, but unacceptable. And so it's a little hard to see here, but these are basically shacks made of scraps of plywood, leftover doors. There's some tarps on the roof there. So this is not what every Roma village looked like, but certainly many of them looked like this. I remember the first time we drove through a little, you couldn't even call it a village. You had to call it maybe a camp or something like that. But I remember the first time we drove through a Roma camp in Slovakia, and I thought to myself, y'all, this is Europe. They have the European Union. They have safety nets here. How in the world do these living conditions exist in this place? But it was quite rough. And so I want to show you. There were camps like this in Slovakia that we visited, but not only in Slovakia. We went into Ukraine for a short visit, and this is what it looked like there as well. Okay, so I mentioned earlier that I helped out with the youth group, and so this is a picture of the youth group. This is our Christmas party, I think. So you've got, the musicians are set up here, the Christmas tree is up there, the youth room was full, and I don't think I have a picture of it to my great regret, but I gotta tell you a story about the youth room. So this is looking up to the stage. You can see, look, they have their very own screen, but if I had, instead of facing the stage, if I had turned around and faced the back wall, there was a huge painting on the back wall. I mean, huge, probably 10 feet high, maybe 8 feet wide. And in the youth room, the subject of the painting was the sacrifice of Isaac. And so you have to imagine, and I just thought that was the oddest choice for a youth room. That here is this child. I mean, they portrayed him leaning over a rock, and I mean, on the verge of death, but that was the picture in the youth room. So that always just really tickled me. None of them thought it was funny, but I just thought, how silly, what an odd choice for that. So I want to show you some more of the people that I interacted with. So this person right here, her name is also Lubka, but she was my tutor. She taught me Slovak, and then that's her husband. And this character right in the middle, his name is AJ. He's not Slovak at all. So on the first day that I made it to my hometown, my host mom and her niece picked me up from the train station. I got to the house, I dropped off my bags, and then my boss came over, the person from the church who was going to help oversee and supervise my time there. And he said, "It's great to meet you. I want to take you for a coffee. There's another missionary in town. He's also Lutheran. He's also from Texas." And I thought, what? So the Missouri Synod Church also has worldwide missions, and in the same town, they did different things. In that town, their mission was teaching. So AJ is from Dallas, and so on my first day in this brand new home, I got to go run into a fellow Texan. And he provided the comic relief throughout the whole year. He was just a really, really fun person. He has stayed in Slovakia. So this whole time, so I got back in 2010. That was 13 years ago. He stayed the whole time. working at different schools. He met a Slovak woman, they got married, now they have 2 kids. So he is staying there. And I would still bet that after these 14 years, he still can't speak Slovak. That is, he couldn't speak it while I was there, and I would bet money he still can't speak it even now. But that's okay. This is the group of, mostly the group of moms that I worked with to teach English. And they are the ones that actually gifted me the painting of the yellow church that's on the table, the church that I worked at. This guy, he's one of the young adult leaders at the church who helped us out when we had translating issues. And this is the group of young parents, at least some of them, some of the young parents that I helped with their English. Okay, so let me move on a little bit. And I want to give you a little bit more information about the Roma people in particular. So, as I mentioned, the population of Slovakia is about 5 million. The official Roma population in Slovakia is 68,000. But because of the nature of their lifestyle and the difficulty with getting accurate counts for the census, there could be as many as 500,000 Roma in Slovakia. It really is that hard to get an accurate census count for them. But as I mentioned, historically marginalized and oppressed, and maybe the closest comparison we have in the United States would be indigenous people, so Native Americans, because Native Americans and Roma experience some of the same treatment by the government. So Roma people, Roma children were also gathered and sent to boarding schools and forbidden from speaking their native language. They were forbidden from practicing their culture, their traditions. And so, and now even, the Roma people tend to be kind of grouped together geographically, not in such a stark way as our reservations are here in the United States. It's not like that, but they just tend to group together a little bit more, and they face a lot of the same challenges: high rates of alcoholism, difficulty with school graduation rates, and low attendance for college, things like that. So in some ways, that's probably the closest comparison we have here in the United States. And then I have a few more facts about the Roma, some of which I already shared, so I'm going to just move on to a couple of them. So actually, during the Holocaust, you may recall when I spoke about my interview for Slovakia, I said I remembered facts from World War II I hadn't remembered since junior high. I remembered that the Roma, or as they are often called gypsies, you can hear that term a lot, gypsies were actually one of the targeted groups for extermination by the Nazis. And so that's part of that oppression that they have experienced throughout their lives. So as I mentioned, oftentimes you'll hear Roma people referred to as gypsy. That's because for a long time people thought that they came from Egypt historically. And so Egypt, gypsy. So that became just a slang word for them. But really, and even now, sometimes people still use the word gypped. If if someone cheats you, you'll say they gypped me. But that really is a racial slur connected to that slang word gypsy. So we're trying to. So people who know that connection try to point it out, just so people are aware that this is actually a racial slur against the Roma. It's just kind of a mischaracterization of of the stereotype of who they are. And then I mentioned lots of difficulties documenting their history and culture. Nowadays, there is kind of a Roma ethnic group. like an affinity group that crosses borders. So they've created a flag. There's actually an international Roma Day that their people and their culture are recognized, but they don't have their own land. They're not from Romania. Sometimes people think that the Roma are from Romania, but that's not the case. The Roma are minorities everywhere they go. Okay. Olivia there we go. So I wanted to show you a little bit of what the town of Prešov looks like. This is a pretty good shot because the buildings are painted nice bright colors. But those nice bright colors came after the communism fell. So typically, as in other parts of town that haven't been updated, these were all cinder block gray. Very, very dull cinder block gray. So this is just one of the sections of town that, high-rise apartments. But, there's a lot of the population that live in these multifamily dwellings, but we're not talking about luxury condos. We're not talking about, lots of square footage. These were all pretty small apartments, and a lot of time they housed entire families, families of 5 or 6. The host family that I lived with, Lubka's cousin, her name was Vera. Vera and her family lived in an apartment complex like this. They had 4 children, and square footage was limited. And so while the children were young and all still living in the house, Vera and her husband had to take over a section of the living room, and they had to kind of block it off with bookshelves. But that was just the way it all worked. I mean, they had a nice apartment. It wasn't run down. It wasn't a bad place. It was very comfortable. But, when you've got very little square footage to work with, you've got to make it work. So let's see here. And then this is the interior of one of the apartments. This is in particular where Hniezdo was located, so the group that helped the young Roma women who came out of the orphanage system. So here's your kitchen where you had to learn how to cook. And then they also did their best to teach hands-on trade, so sewing, different things like that, so the girls could have some transferable skills. The girls would also make things that they could sell at different markets or things like that. Just to help get a little extra money for the apartment. So I will tell you, well, as I mentioned a little bit earlier, I was in the kitchen cooking some Slovak food, which my mother helped finish. But in this kitchen, I was no help. In this kitchen, all of the cookbooks were in Slovak. And like I said, I learned Slovak, but you don't learn the words for grating and, leavening, having an even measurement versus a heaping measurement and things like that. Also, everything was in the metric system. So how much is 300 grams of flour? I couldn't tell you. I would have to Google it. And this was before smartphones. So I was really no help in this kitchen. But I helped a little bit. And so, as I mentioned, sometimes they would sew things that they could sell at a market. And then they also made greeting cards. So they would take scraps of craft supplies or whatnot, and they would make greeting cards that they would then sell. This is a booth at the Christmas market that was in town there. And this is one of the other volunteers. Well, actually, she was paid. This is one of the paid staff that helped with the ministry. Her name was Ivka. And then I just wanted to give you a shot of what the countryside looked like. So Slovakia is very green, very green. Lots of, in the north you have a mountain range called the Tatras, so you get, pretty high elevations. You can ski, there's different resorts up there. As you go farther south in the country, you get a little bit more of the kind of plains terrain there for farmland and whatnot. But we had climbed to a little ruined castle, and this was the view from the ruined castle. So, you know, living in Europe is a bit of a culture shock. They have a much longer history, especially in terms of, organized civilization than we do here. And so the house that I lived in Slovakia, if I looked to a hill in the distance on the left, on the top of the hill was a ruined castle site. Then I could just turn a little bit to the right, and on the top of another hill was another ruined castle site. And so it was, there's just a lot of history in the surrounding area for sure. So that was very, very different. Let's see here. There we go. Just a few more pictures then of kind of local culture and what things look like. So they too have cultural festivals. And so these are traditional outfits for the men and women. They would have, different singing groups. Up here you can kind of see there's a dance troupe that's doing some traditional dance. There's my buddy AJ right there. And so, yeah, they have those cultural festivals throughout the year. This is a view from the tower of the steeple of the Catholic Church. So downtown in Prešov. So this is the main street right here, and then this is what begins to comprise the main square. So I'm standing in the steeple of the Catholic Church. If you go down to the ground and you want to find the Lutheran church, it's about 10 feet away. So if you had a really big wingspan, you could stand in the alley and touch the Catholic church on one side and the Lutheran church on the other side. So the paintings that are on the table in the foyer, the yellow church is the Lutheran church, and in the background of that picture you can see a steeple. Well, that's the Catholic church. And then the other picture is the Catholic church. And in the background of that painting, you can see another steeple, and that's the Lutheran church, because they are right next door to each other. So one thing that I really loved, so, this is downtown, this is Main Street over here. So these buildings are all shops and restaurants. Once you get to the street behind it, you have more residences. But, you've got to imagine pretty much none of these buildings are air conditioned. So in the summertime, the restaurants would set up these outdoor temporary decks and tents. So these were all on raised wooden platforms, but each one of these different tents belongs to a restaurant, and that was their summer outdoor eating space. You could get your food and your beer and go outside and and sit outside at the tables. So, but they take those down in the winter months because of the snow. But this is the same place where they have their winter market, and so busy area. So I wanted to share next a few highlights throughout my year in Slovakia. So All Saints Day is November 1st. Here in the United States, we have a kind of a growing awareness of the Dia de los Muertos celebrations. And in Slovakia, their All Saints Day celebrations were a little closer to that. So on All Saints Day, families would go to the cemeteries, in droves. It wasn't like, one or two people are at the cemetery today. The cemeteries were packed. And so the house that I lived in was across the street from the main city cemetery. And I don't know exactly how many graves were there, but it was thousands of graves were there. And for All Saints Day, everyone, it seemed like, had a candle or bouquets of flowers or special wreaths that were laid there. And it was a very moving experience. One of my friends took me to visit. He was going to visit his grandfather's grave, and so he came and he got me because he wanted me to experience it. And it was it really did feel like a very holy time to be walking through the cemetery with, like I said, hundreds of other people were all out doing the same things. And so that was very interesting. The cemetery that was across the street, the one that we visited, had thousands of graves, but it had a special section of the cemetery that was devoted to German soldiers that had died there in Slovakia during the war. And they weren't going to transport the bodies back home, but they wanted to give them a proper burial. So there's a section of that cemetery that we visited, that I lived across the street from, that had it was a special section for German soldiers that died there during the war. Thanksgiving was very special. They don't celebrate Thanksgiving in Slovakia, but if you're an American living in Europe, you get to celebrate both holidays. So you get to celebrate all the American holidays and all the Slovak holidays. So I still got Thanksgiving. And what we did was all of my colleagues that were in Slovakia and Hungary, we were invited to go to Budapest, in Hungary. One of the other... Well, he happened to be an American pastor with the Reformed Church, but he worked a lot with the Lutheran Church missionaries, and so he and his wife invited us to their apartment. So we got the real deal for Thanksgiving dinner, which was really great. Christmas was very special to experience their traditions. I got to travel a lot, so got to go to all the countries around Slovakia that you saw on the map. So Poland, Czech Republic, Austria, Hungary, Ukraine. Took a little trip into Slovenia as well. So I got to do a lot there. Ran a half marathon in Prague, which I was not a runner before that occurred. But a lot of the kids in the youth group and the young adult leaders were all big into running. So they said, come on, you've got several months to train. You can do this. And so I trained to the best of my ability and ran the half marathon in Prague. So if you ever have to suffer through running, 13 miles, I suggest Prague. It makes things a lot better. So funny story about that, though. So a regulation time for a half marathon is 3 hours. I finished in 2 hours and 55 minutes. I was real proud of myself because there was a lot of walking the last 6 miles, or maybe 4 miles. But so I finished. I was exhausted, crossed the finish line, found my group, and they were runners. They all finished in like 90 minutes or something like that. So I walked over to them like, hey guys, here I am, I'm done. And I expected congratulations, and the first thing they said was, where were you? They said, we thought you got injured on the route, so we had gone to the medical tent, and we said, did you pick up an American who doesn't speak Czech? Because we can't find our friend. So, the runner's high quickly fled, and I was, not real pleased after that. But it was okay. I still had my personal victory, so that was okay. Easter is very special in Slovakia. They have a few traditions around Easter that are different than ours for sure. On Easter Monday, it's still considered a holiday, but they really treat it as kind of the welcoming of spring, the end of winter, the welcoming of spring. They have a horrible tradition of, on Easter Monday, boys of all ages get to make a switch. Okay, right? Go out to the tree, pull down a twig, you turn it into a switch, and then you get to go torture. You get to go find young women, and you playfully give them a beating. And so it was the weirdest thing. So they come wake you up in the morning. They tell you to come outside, and I had a 6-year-old boy drag me outside, and there's a song that they sing while they hit you with this switch. I was like, is this real? Is this a dream? But it's this song about welcoming spring and getting ready for, whatever and whatnot. And then you're all supposed to go in and drink a shot of liquor. So I think that was the real tradition they were getting at. But so yes, lots of other good learning I mean, it's hard to even put into words how much you can absorb when you live in a place for a year. So I'm going to have to pass up many things because, we have to get to lunch eventually. But I'll say the best parts. So with all of the things you can learn, living in a different place for a year, particularly a foreign country, hands down, the best parts were the people, God, and the work God did in me during that time, and the lifelong transformation because of it. So the people, hands down, were wonderful. The host family that I lived with were incredibly hospitable, took very good care of me. I still talk with them occasionally, not as much as I used to, but I went to both of the weddings for each of their daughters. And so the youngest got married in 2019 in Slovakia. So Danny and I went to that. We got to take Lila with us. And I have some of their wedding cookies out on the table there, as well as a little pamphlet about their wedding traditions. But truly, just wonderful people. And so when we went back in 2019, I had not been there for 9 years. That's a long time to go without seeing people. But I got to see my old boss, and we just picked up a conversation like it had been yesterday. It was really something. So lots of nostalgia. It is kind of hard to go back to a place like that and visit, because just being there kind of floods you with memories, floods you with your time there, the joys, the struggles. So it is a little bittersweet to go back and visit. God obviously had a huge role to play in getting me to Slovakia. And in some ways, I couldn't appreciate what God was teaching me until I got back home. And even for years to come, there are so many things that I have learned about God that it just took me a long time to put together. And in addition to that, there was this, for sure my life is different because I went to Slovakia. I will always have a sermon illustration to use because I went to Slovakia. I hold back on how many sermon illustrations I use from Slovakia. If I wanted to, I could start many sermons with, when I was in Slovakia. So I'm really tempering myself on that one. But that's the bulk of it. The last part, maybe Cindy can send it out or something. It's just a video about young adults in global mission and their program. And I'll just show you briefly. I'm not going to show you the video, but this is where the ELCA serves internationally. So all over the world. And then if you just, if your interest is just piqued and you want to learn more, then could you advance the slide? This is kind of sticking. Thank you. ELCA Global Mission is on Facebook and Instagram. We have a Slovak Zion Synod, part of the ELCA. It's the only non-geographical synod in the ELCA. And in our hymnal, hymn number 602, that is a Slovak hymn that was translated into English for us. And then pierogies, that's food. So for lunch today, the pierogies are real easy because they're a Slovak dish, but also common to other European countries, particularly Poland. So I did not make those from scratch. They came from the freezer section at H-E-B. So after this, if you just love those pierogies, you can go get your own in the freezer section at H-E-B. I'll show you the box. Typically, I always have some in my freezer now. But the other dish that I made is called brinzové halušky. That's the Slovak national dish, and I'll tell you, it's always better in Slovakia. But it is kind of a, if you've had a German spätzle noodle, it's kind of like that. You have to grate potatoes, you mix it up. Anyway, in Slovakia, they make it with sheep's cheese, which you can't really get here. We have feta, we have goat cheese. So it gets kind of close. So you'll get to sample the bryndzové halušky. You'll get to sample it. But those are some things that I made. I know we're at noon, but does anyone have any questions? And if there's a lot, maybe we can just talk over lunch too. Yes, Elizabeth. Yeah, the hardest part. So I had a headache for 3 months. The first 3 months I was in Slovakia, I had a headache because I couldn't understand what anyone around me was saying. And that was really hard. Not only was it hard for day-to-day living, but it felt like a safety factor it felt like a risk to not be able to know what people around you are saying. So I had a lot of youth and young adult leaders that also spoke English, so they could translate for me if needed, but you couldn't we didn't have Google Translate on the phone. I mean, nowadays, honestly, it's probably a lot different because of the translation resources available just at your fingertips. But I mean, I had dictionaries, hard book dictionaries that I put out on the table. That's what I had. So that was the really hard part, was the language barrier for those first 3 months. And sometimes you just missed familiar things. You just missed, macaroni and cheese the way you were used to having it. You just missed, you missed that. And I did have to make a lot of accommodations for life events. So I missed maybe 2 or 3 weddings of my friends that got married right after graduation. There's just things you can't come back for. Even though it's not like we were stuck in Slovakia. If there was a real emergency, yes, you can go home. But they really encouraged you to stay unless it was an absolute emergency. So those things made it hard. And also just navigating a different town that was very, I'd never lived in a city before. And walking places, taking the bus, that wasn't really hard. It's just that things looked so unfamiliar. There just weren't the familiar trappings of home to kind of comfort you. So. And re-entry, oh my gosh, re-entry was so hard. So they prepped us on this. They told us that you will likely experience reverse culture shock when you get home, and that was real. So I never realized how much waste we produce here compared to other countries. I never realized how cold air conditioning was compared to, countries that don't have it. In Slovakia, I think their favorite thing in the whole wide world are potatoes. They can make a potato in about 1,000 different ways. When I got home, and I'm a person that loves French fries, I love hash browns with my breakfast, I could not eat a potato product for at least 6 months. I was like, I'm done. I've had my life's fill of potatoes. So that was hard. And it was also hard knowing that during that intense year in Slovakia, you build relationships with people, and then when you go home, it's just hard knowing you're not going to see some of those people ever again. Some of them, maybe, but on the whole, you were never going to be able to get back that life-changing experience that you had. So that was really hard. Yeah. Well, we could do this. Maybe, Cindy, if we want to move into lunch, and then if we have additional questions, I'd be happy to talk more. As I mentioned, this is probably my favorite thing to talk about. This is like 1% of the pictures I have. This is, maybe one day I'll write a book. I don't know. But yeah, it's really very close to my heart, this experience. So thank you. And actually, funny connection. So Tom's daughter also did Young Adults in Global Mission and also went to Slovakia. So Yeah, I was there the year, I think I was there in 2009 and 10, so I was there the year before, yeah. So just small world. I show up at St. Peter's, and Tom's already been to Slovakia, and so that was a nice connection. But, well, why don't we have a prayer, and I'll pray for lunch as well, and then we'll go eat. Good and gracious God, I thank you so much that you show up in our lives in ways that are big and ways that are small. God, I thank you for this experience, and that in sharing it, I can relive the joy of it. And I pray, Lord, that you will continue to inspire us with the ways in which your Holy Spirit moves among us through different life experiences. Lord, teach us how we can continue to be your servants wherever we are, whether near or far from home. God, we ask that you bless the food we are about to eat so that it may nourish us and strengthen us for service in your kingdom. And all God's children say, Amen. Thanks, everybody.